It's been 20 years since my partner, Terence Unity Freitas, and two other land rights defenders were murdered in Colombia while working with the indigenous Utabaywa Pueblo. For almost a decade, we'd been fighting for the right to protect their ancestral lands from being destroyed by an open-pit coal mine. And although it was only a few months before our deaths that the Colombian government finally stepped in to recognize the community's territorial rights, sadly, it wasn't enough to save us. Like many families of murder victims, we've had to fight not just for our loved ones' lives, but even for the right to know what happened to them. It's been a long road to get here, but this year in 2023, we finally got the news that we've been waiting for. We've received an invitation to participate as victims in a transitional justice case related to the post-Civil War. We hope that the court will find those responsible for ordering our murders and bring them to justice. I have written a memoir, Truth Demands, and which is being released this week. It tells the story of how in the months leading up to my partner's death, he and our friends faced down repeated death threats from guerrillas supporting oil development on UWA land. But it also describes the profound impact of the violence on our family, particularly the toll it took on me. Over the course of researching, writing, and revising the manuscript, I've revisited so much of the past, both joyful and painful. I felt as though I was living in two different timelines, reliving moments from nearly 3 decades ago with the same intensity as when they happened. In doing this work, I discovered things about my partner that I never knew, like this letter he wrote in December 2004 to a friend, describing the threats they were facing and expressing his fear of dying. I don't think I'll ever stop crying every time I read these words. He talks about how he could easily be killed because people around him are losing their minds and no longer value human life. My heart breaks at the thought of how right he was, that in the end, his life would be taken, and that part of him knew it. I feel like a burden has been lifted now that we can share this part of his story, to show who he was as a person, not just as a symbol of a statistic of environmental violence. Here's another piece of correspondence from the archive. It's an email sent by one of Terry's colleagues, Karen McClellan, to a listserv related to the human rights situation in Colombia. On December 26, 2005, she writes, "We need your help immediately. Please call the numbers below if you are able to do so. Also, please pass the message on to anyone else who might be helpful." Beneath that, someone added a note, "Please call Washington ASAP. Karen is in a state of panic and doesn't sound like herself. Seems very afraid. I'm going to try to get to her right away. If you're close to her, please go to her house immediately." This is all so surreal. It's like I'm watching it unfold in real time. It feels very painful to know that there was nothing any of us could do to change what happened next. Karen goes on to say that she called Terry at home and left a message asking him to call her urgently. Then she called the local human rights office to see if anyone had heard from Terry or could contact him. She writes that Terry had been receiving death threats for months and had just been to a meeting in Bogota with the National Land Restitution Program, a government entity created to address historical land dispossession. When Karen finally reached Terry by phone, he told her that he was okay and that the meeting in Bogota had gone well. But then he disappeared. His body turned up the following day with 5 gunshot wounds. One thing I've struggled with since Terry was killed is that he never got to finish his thoughts. Like this idea that somehow in writing the book, I'm speaking on behalf of his unfinished ideas and thoughts. In a way, I am doing that. But I want to make sure that I'm representing his ideas accurately. I do feel a responsibility to honor his memory and share his story. But it's such a delicate balance between wanting to advocate for causes that he cared deeply about, like protecting the environment, and standing up for indigenous rights and making sure that in doing so, I'm not appropriating his voice. Over the past 8 years, I've been trying to figure out how to write about this experience without contributing to my partner's death being sensationalized or exploited. There's this phrase that stuck with me, "Never play dead in a world that makes you invisible." It's from a project by the Invisible Women Collective, an activist group based in Beirut. They came up with this slogan in response to the August 2020 Beirut port explosion, a disaster that claimed over 200 lives and injured 6,000 others. At the time, the Lebanese government blamed the explosion on the carelessness of protesters who'd set fire to nearby tires. But an investigation later found that the real cause was the government's failure to address safety concerns related to improperly stored ammonium nitrate. The collective went on to write, "When the system that governs you does not care about your existence, you become invisible. You are denied your most basic right to exist, to be counted. And when you are not counted, you do not exist in the eyes of the state. You become expendable, disposable, killable." What's so shocking is that this happened in 2020, not in some dystopian future imagined by a science fiction author. In Terry's case, there was a political motive behind the smear campaign that attempted to erase his memory and legacy. In the days and weeks after his death, guerrilla groups and politicians tried to paint him as a foreign agent, implying that he had CIA ties. That's why it's been so important for me to document his life and work, to show that he was a beloved member of the Uwa community and someone who dedicated his career to empowering indigenous people to stand up for their own rights. There's this feeling that if you're quiet, if you hide, then whatever is happening to you isn't real, that it won't affect you. But the opposite is true. Acknowledging what happened is the only way to move forward. To let go, you have to speak up and name what happened, even though it's been excruciating to relive every detail of this ordeal. I have to believe that in doing this, I'm helping other people understand the consequences of environmental destruction. The violence that led to Terry's death was the product of complex factors, including the global demand for natural resources and the lengths some will go to secure them, as well as the social and economic conditions that can drive people to take up arms. He was killed on December 27, 2005, 2 days after meeting with the National Land Restitution Program. The fact that this meeting took place in the capital city of Bogotá shows how committed he was to advancing this cause. He didn't feel safe traveling to the country's capital alone, so he asked a friend to accompany him. Sadly, this proved fatal. The assassins followed them to the airport, and then to Terry's friend's house where they were staying. One of the men knocked on the door and asked to use the bathroom. While his friend kept watch, Terry went inside to show him where it was. As soon as the door closed behind them, the gunman drew a pistol and fired. Then he opened the door and shot Terry's friend several times. The attackers fled. When police arrived, they found Terry lying in a pool of blood. He was pronounced dead at the scene. When I learned about the details of Terry's death, I was heartbroken, angry, and terrified. How could something like this happen? What kind of world do we live in where someone could plan such a targeted attack? Over the years, I've come to realize that violence is sometimes the only option available to those who have no other means to protect themselves. Still, it doesn't make it any less tragic that Terry was killed trying to protect something so vital to the health of our planet. The search for justice is ongoing. In January 2023, 28 members of the Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia, also known as the FARC, were formally charged with ordering the killings of Terry, his colleague Elizabeth Jennifer Ortiz, and their driver, Javier Eduardo Ortiz. Ortiz is survived by his wife and 4 children. Jennifer is survived by her parents, her husband, daughter, and 2 stepchildren. Terry was my partner, my best friend, and the love of my life. But more than that, he was a brilliant legal scholar whose work advanced human rights and environmental protections around the world. After his death, Terry became known as the patron saint of environmentalists. Thousands of people have signed up to receive updates on the case against those responsible for his murder, and dozens more who died alongside him in defense of the Uwa people's land rights. As a journalist, I've covered countless stories about environmental destruction and the violence used to protect corporate interests. But Terry's case hit close to home because of our relationship. He wasn't just a fellow journalist or an acquaintance. He was someone I loved deeply. In the years since his death, I've continued to research, write, and speak out about the importance of protecting the environment and standing up for indigenous rights. It hasn't been easy, especially during the pandemic when so much of our work has gone virtual. But thanks to advances in technology, we can still connect with each other and build solidarity across borders. In fact, last year I was able to attend a virtual conference on climate justice in Colombia, thanks to the support of a professional organization. At the event, I met with lawyers and activists working on land restitution cases in Colombia. They shared their experiences and insights with me and helped me better understand the challenges they face in seeking justice for their clients. One of the most valuable things I learned was that despite the risks involved, Indigenous communities are not giving up. They continue to fight for their rights and for a more sustainable future for all of us. I came away from the conference feeling inspired and energized to keep working toward positive change in my own sphere of influence. What keeps me hopeful is knowing that there are so many people out there who share Terry's passion for justice and the environment. People from all walks of life who are coming together to demand accountability from those responsible for environmental destruction and the violence used to protect it. Thanks to advances in technology, we can stay connected and build solidarity even when we're far away from each other. If you're looking for ways to get involved, consider following organizations working to protect Indigenous rights and the environment. You can also reach out to your elected officials and urge them to support policies that prioritize sustainability and social justice. Every voice matters, and together we can make a difference. Thank you.